Hello, I'm Ashley Kent. Welcome to GrowthDx. I am joined here today with Pamela Zients. She is joining us from the mountains of Colorado, which we're all jealous of here in our summer heat. She is a partner at JM Search, where she works with investor-backed healthcare companies to place executive leaders across pretty much every seat at the table. I actually just met her a couple months ago over the summer, and we immediately clicked. She was actually one of the very first meetings that I had sitting across from her at a Starbucks. And while obviously her job is technically in talent, and further conversations that I had with her throughout the conference, I was really impressed with just her expertise in the healthcare space more broadly, given she spent more than 20 years inside the space, from HCA to health systems to startups, consulting, and then now executive search. She has such an incredible pulse on where the industry's going, where capital's moving, and what it means for leaders building these companies. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today, talking through healthcare talent market, but honestly, I'm excited to probe into your brain as we're thinking about just the broader industry in general. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited for our discussion.
Well, perfect. Well, I know I gave a little bit of background on you, but I think no one says it better than the person who has lived through it. I'd love for you to bring everyone up to speed on just your journey of what brought you to where you are today.
Great. I'll try to keep it brief because you did a good job. So I came into executive search about 7 years ago. I like to say mid-career. For some people, maybe it would be late career. Prior to that, I had spent about 20 years in healthcare. You mentioned I worked for hospital systems doing strategy, business development, planning work. Did a 4-year stint at the advisory board company where I had worked in my 20s. So I was what they call boomerang there. Went to a startup in digital health before we called it digital health. Unfortunately, we failed. And then eventually found my way into executive search. As I mentioned, about 7 years ago, I was with a small boutique firm, and then I moved over to JM Search in January of 2025. We like to say we are a Goldilocks firm. We're not a little boutique, and we're not what in my industry we call a Shrek firm, which is Spencer Short, Russell Reynolds, et cetera. We're somewhere in the middle. We have about 50 people in our healthcare practice and about 300 people firm-wide, growing leaps and bounds. Our focus is mostly on investor-backed companies, particularly in healthcare. It's private equity from lower middle market all the way up to bigger companies, and then also some venture, private or public companies as well.
Very cool. You have literally dipped your toes into almost every single angle of healthcare, which is why I guess coming out of the week with you, I was like, wow, she really knows her stuff. You have quite a unique vantage point. And I'm curious too, just diving right in, you have this really unique opportunity where you're constantly talking to investors, boards, even CEOs and executives across healthcare. And as you're looking at the talent market right now, what would you say it's telling you about the state of healthcare just more broadly?
Yeah. The investor-backed healthcare talent market remains, I would say, white hot. Our healthcare and life sciences practices are very busy. I make a habit of befriending my competitors. So when I talk to peers at other firms, I'm hearing the same thing. I was talking to one firm yesterday, said they are having to turn away business in their healthcare practice because they're so busy. So it's a great problem for us to have. It's stressful, but it feels a little bit like 2021 when we were coming out of COVID and there was huge demand for executive talent. But I think the reasons right now are very different. Happy to elaborate on that.
Would love to hear why. I mean, I'm curious to
Yeah.
hear the shift from even 2021 to now, and what's actually happening and driving that.
Yeah, I think in 2021, particularly on the venture side and also in PE, deals were like flowing like Niagara Falls, and companies were just getting money and hiring executives, sometimes overhiring or hiring ahead of when they need it. For example, we're a 50-person company. Let's hire a CHRO. You probably don't need a CHRO when you're a 50-person company, right? So I think there was a lot of just money flowing and hiring. Today, I think demand is coming from a mix of, underperforming assets needing an executive shakeup, long held portfolio companies that sort of need a new chapter, And then the true growth plays where they're upgrading leadership to say, okay, we scaled to 75 million. Now we got to get to 150 and we need new leaders who know that journey versus the 25 to 75. So I think, 2021 was about hiring executives to capture growth. Today, a lot of hiring is about creating growth or fixing what is preventing it.
Hmm. Well, I'm
Yeah,
curious too. You've got a lot of the companies that a lot of the cash was going into in 2020 and 2021, and they've now, grown to a point where is that what got you here won't get you there sort of mentality. And a lot of that applies to leadership.
it does.
And so having to start to look at other options at that point.
For sure. For sure. And also sometimes, especially in the lower market where we have clients, PE clients who are the first institutional investor that comes in and they are investing in a founder. And usually these are established, profitable companies, been around 25 years, maybe a family business, and they're investing in the team and in the founder. And if founder wants to stay, they're investing with them, but they often need, for example, their first professional CFO. So the demand for strong CFOs never goes away. We are continuing to see a significant gap between supply and demand of CFOs who have had successful runs in PE backed companies.
It's interesting. I'm curious as you start to separate out because it's very different if you're looking at a PE backed company versus a VC backed company and the strategy of building your leadership team within there. What are you seeing right now on the PE side and as they're building out those executive teams that is making them very successful? And how do you think about that really differently as you're placing someone into a VC backed company at maybe the different stages that someone would be at?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the lines are starting to blur in terms of talent and the right profile of talent. I think for many years on the venture side, the mantra was growth at any cost and, not as much eye on the ball of getting to cash flow positive. Whereas on the PE side, they're investing in companies that have EBITDA and it's all about the multiple of the EBITDA and growing that. So I will hear my PE folks say, well, that candidate looks a little venture-y. They're venture-y. They don't know how to run a business that's going to be profitable. But coming out of 2020, and I'm going to confuse my years, it was 2023 when the Silicon Valley Bank meltdown happened and money started to dry up a bit. It became harder for venture backed companies to get money. They started having to focus on a path to profitability. So I think there are some executives coming out of later stage venture where they're like, I got a company that was far off track to break even. And so that's a really, really hard journey to do. So I do think that some of those folks who have been successful scaling a venture backed company and getting profitability are good candidates for private equity. But there's been a little bit of a, black and white view of their venture person. They don't know PE. So that's an interesting conversation to have with clients, particularly on the PE side, when they sort of have this skepticism around someone who's coming off venture.
That's incredibly interesting. And
Yeah.
especially during the growth at all costs phase where people were just throwing money at problems, it wasn't very strategic. And,
Yeah.
how people were growing and profitability was just not even a part of the equation at that
Yeah.
point. But as we're looking at, just everything is just getting much tighter and the expectations, people are, I mean, you've got to get to cash flow positive to be alive at this point.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to see if kind of that profile of a person, who maybe was in a private equity backed company is now maybe more attractive on the VC side because it's becoming more of a priority
Yeah.
at this point. And if you've been seeing any of that.
Yeah. Some, I think, again, there's a little bit of a Chinese wall still, I think, with venture and PE talent. But I do see people who maybe were in venture early, they had an exit, they went into PE, they got into a company, it got big, it got layered, and they're like, I want to go back to the scrappy gritty. I want to go back to a sub $20 million company and have that run all over again. So we definitely see that.
Super interesting. I'm
Yeah.
curious from that perspective. You said, someone's too venture-y. As you're defining what we'll say a great healthcare CEO would look like, how would you define them differently across venture versus private equity?
I think like the core profile of a CEO, whether it's venture or private equity, I don't think it's changed that much. I think regardless, there is still a strong belief that past performance predicts future success. And so whether you're going to a middle market private equity company or a Series C venture backed company, they want to know that this individual has a history of doing whatever it is they're looking to do. If it's a turnaround, if it's a fix and grow, if it's they took a company from 50 million to 100 million. They want the evidence that they've done that. I have seen on both sides some willingness to flex, particularly around first time CEOs and, openness to people stepping up from a COO or a GM or even a CCO role or even a product strategy role. So many of our clients value, I call them Hamilton candidates. So Scrappy and Hungry, if you ever saw the musical, right? I see a lot of excitement around those kind of candidates. It's about ambition, energy, resourcefulness, hunger, but really something to prove versus someone who's done the same CEO job 4 times and thinks they can do it in their sleep. I think the other thing that is important, this goes across not just CEO, but I would say pretty much every role we're doing, something that investors are prioritizing now that we were not hearing 3 to 4 years ago. I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's like the mammoth in the room, not the elephant anymore, but AI. AI fluency is the clearest new requirement. Boards want leaders who can make intelligent AI investments, deliver margin and productivity improvements, and really separate real value creation gleaned from AI from chasing shiny objects. So it's not that they're looking for someone to be an AI technologist. It's knowing where AI can materially improve the business and how to implement it and make the investments responsibly. That's, I think, the biggest thing when we launch a search and we create a scorecard of the criteria, the AI fluency or AI curiosity is pretty much on every scorecard right now.
It's incredibly interesting, and especially for executives that are currently holding roles and,
Mhm.
are whether a turnaround CEO or whatever it may be that they're stepping into, having that, which kind of lends itself to exactly what you were saying of starting to look at that scrappy and hungry sort of mentality. That those are probably the people that are more in the operations of actually implementing that and have lived it firsthand to be able to figure out where to plug in AI. And they're going to
Yeah,
have more of a seat at the table of building that prior where they could then maybe bring that expertise into another
yeah,
company.
for sure.
That's incredibly interesting. And, it's finding that balance of, like you said, it's, are you someone who has, grown a company from 10 to 100 million or, what is the expertise that you're trying to lean into?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I know you spend a good majority of your time with private equity backed companies. I'm curious, what do you see separates executives that are incredibly successful in a PE backed environment versus maybe somewhere else?
Yes. I think the key thing is range. They need to be able to work up and down the organization. These businesses are very lean, so the leaders need to be lean. They might not even have an executive assistant or the infrastructure they may have had earlier in their career. I have a lot of CEOs. When I ask them, who do I work with to schedule? Me. I don't have anybody, right? So I think range is the most important thing. They need to be able to be on the front line and also manage upward to a sophisticated PE board. And they need to balance margin and mission. We're in healthcare. A lot of your frontline staff who's far removed from the board are mission oriented. They might be clinicians, depending on the business. They're in healthcare because they want to serve and help people. So balancing from a cultural perspective, mission, but with accountability towards margin. They have to be decisive. And again, they have to be willing to get in the details when necessary. I've gotten calls before from PE firms or their portfolio companies after they've hired some, big company person. They were 20 years at CVS or 20 years at Aetna, but they failed to transition because they couldn't really adjust to life without all the bells and whistles. They weren't used to sweeping the floors and making the coffee. And so, I mean, I would say it's not universal though, because I often get introduced to someone who's trapped within a super big company. They've been there 20 years. They've stayed because that company has afforded them promotion and opportunity to learn new things, but they're itching to get out. They're sick of bureaucracy. They're sick of the politics and they want to be somewhere more entrepreneurial, but you really have to test for that to make sure, can you go somewhere where you're not going to have an EA?
Well,
So
No, and I love
Yeah.
that because I think there's such a misconception too that within a private equity backed company that the cash is flowing, right? But at the end of the day, they're, focused on margin and growing EBITDA. And so, that's going to be, you're going to be very limited on your resource and they're going to try and, extract as much value out of the team that you currently have or whichever resources you're tapping into. And that can be a total misconception that someone would maybe
Yeah.
have. There should be another misconception as well is after private equity has acquired a company, the fear is, are they going to come in and completely shake up the leadership team and bring in someone with a big logo behind their name to be able to grow this? And, from what I'm
Mhm.
hearing you say, it is, less about that than they want the founder that has been building this. And, if it is a mission oriented company, like you said, in healthcare, most of the time it is, they're going to have that. But then maybe the other resources they're able to apply to this for them to really understand how to scale and grow beyond what they were able to do on their own.
Yeah. And one thing that you sort of mentioned about, are they going to come in and like rip out the leadership team? I think sometimes that's what's needed, but oftentimes we're bringing in a new leader and we, the board and the CEO of it, might think there is some shuffling of the deck that needs to happen in the underlying team. And I always ask people, how are you going to assess the team and make those very difficult decisions? And I love when someone's like, I'm not going to come in and fire a bunch of people and put in my people. I'm going to take 90 days. I'm going to assess people and get to know them. And I'm going to determine, are they in the right role? If not, is there someone else? Is somewhere else they can go? And if not, how do I help them land somewhere else and do that in a way that doesn't get everybody shaking in their shoes? But I do think someone who's a bull in a china shop generally isn't the right person unless that's exactly what the PE firm is looking for, which sometimes they are. So,
Sometimes they are. And, it does differ too between if you're, acquiring, say, a clinical practice versus, say, a service oriented company that is serving healthcare in a different way. It can look entirely differently and what that implementation period looks like within there.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, when to that point, like if an investment thesis depends on aggressive growth and acquisitions or, operational transformation is very different than maybe how someone was operating before. How much does leadership ultimately decide and determine where that thesis succeeds?
Yeah. I mean, I think that leadership is critical, but I think we have to avoid the people are everything answer. The team has to be highly capable. More importantly, they have to be aligned. They have to have a healthy tension, the ability to debate, and then say, okay, this is where we're going. And if that's not where you wanted to go, Ashley, then get on board and move on. Egos, turf wars, lack of trust can undermine even an individually talented group. But I think even the best high performing teams will struggle if the underlying fundamentals are weak. You don't have product market fit. The market is moving against the business and you're not able to pivot or evolve, or the sponsor expectations are unrealistic. I often talk to people and I'm like, you've only been in this role a year. Why are you talking to me? Well, I came into the business. It was a $50 million business. They wanted to grow to 75 million a year. I was told there was pipeline. I was told it was happening. I got in, found the pipeline was vaporware. And guess what? We're not going to make those numbers. And I'm worried. I'm trying to get ahead of them removing me. Right. So I think if the fundamentals are weak underlying, even the best team might not be able to work its magic. So.
That actually reminds me that was something that you had brought up before of something to encourage your candidates to do is, sign an NDA and get under the hood to start to evaluate
Mm,
this ahead of time. And I think that was one of the best pieces of
yes.
advice I had
Yes.
heard because I can't even tell you the amount of times that they have sold me the stars and the moon. They're looking to be acquired in 12 months, which, all the things line up to, we're
Yeah.
on the path and it's going to be
Yeah.
come in quick job and you get in there and it's a dumpster fire.
Right.
And it
Right.
then reflects on you versus, the underlying plumbing that's within there.
Right.
And
That's right. You're totally right. I always tell people, and I don't know if we're getting ahead of the conversation here, but I always tell my clients, as candidates get further down the path and they get under NDA, show them the warts. Tell them what might surprise you in your first month. And tell candidates, ask them, what's going to be my biggest surprise my first month on the job? Like, ask these questions, because I can't tell you how many times I've had a candidate placement call me 60 days in and say, they didn't tell me this, they didn't tell me that. I'm like, okay, did you ask? Well, so oftentimes I talk to candidates and they've had a mulligan. They've had something like this happen where they said, shame on me. I was chasing the CEO role, wanted to be a CEO. I didn't do enough diligence. Next time, these are the questions I'm going to ask. But if they have that pattern 3 times in a row that happening, then I'm like, shame on you. Like, once bitten, twice shy. Ask the questions the next time. Don't have another mulligan. Right. So
And every company is not perfect, and none of them are.
none are.
But, and that's where it comes into the personality type of, are you that scrappy person that's going to come in, and are you
Yeah.
the builder, or are you being sold that this is a quick turn, scale?
Yeah.
And scale is
Yeah.
not possible, a non-existent foundation, and you're dealing with a completely different problem altogether.
Yeah.
So, no, I think that's the best advice. And honestly, I started doing it myself as we're talking to clients, and I tell people too, I'm as much vetting you as you guys are vetting me. And
Right.
I want to be successful at the end of the day, and I
Yeah,
want this to be a mutual success story.
for sure.
So I love that. I'm curious, as we turn kind of the conversation a little bit more just to the broader commercial, just leadership
Hmm.
within healthcare. So, I mean, you recruit across a bunch of different functions: CEO, operations, finance, technology, all kinds of commercial roles. I'm curious, what are you seeing change specifically around commercial leadership in healthcare today?
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. Like, our firm recruits across everything. I do have a little bit of a major in go-to-market searches. So chief commercial, chief revenue, chief marketing, etc. I think the fundamentals have not changed much. Great sales leaders still need a track record of building a repeatable, scalable, predictable sales process and creating accountability, and of course hitting numbers. AI, again, is increasingly an enabler for productivity and efficiency, but doesn't replace those core commercial disciplines. Um, I sort of alluded to this earlier. We do pay close attention, particularly with sales leaders, to jumpiness. Everybody gets their mulligan, but repeated 1 and 2 year stints do require pretty deep diligence. So I don't think the core profile of a great sales leader has changed much, but I do think how they're going to leverage AI, their track record of success, and making sure that is verifiable. I talked to a lot of sales there. I did this, I did the I. I'm like, where's the we in this? If I talk to your CEO, is he going to say you did all that? If I talk to your peer in marketing, are they going to validate this? If I talk to someone who reported to you, are they going to say the same thing? So remember that we are asking around confidentially. We want to understand, like, what you're saying is actually validated by those who worked with you or for you. So
Super interesting. I'm curious, within, considering your focus more on the go-to-market function and growth perspective within there, are you seeing where, to that point of the we, you have to have that holistic approach to what you're doing, and are companies starting to expect leaders in either, whether it's a marketing or sales function, do they need to start actually understand the entire commercial engine rather than their individual function? I see this all the time being in a marketer.
yes.
I feel like I live with a sales hat on. I'm in B2B healthcare. And so it's
Hmm.
such a, the best organizations are like this. And when they're like this, it's just an absolute, you know what?
Yes. We are, I think a lot of times a company says, well, we're hiring a chief commercial officer. And just, generically speaking, that implies they're going to own sales, account management, and marketing. Usually what we're looking for first and foremost is a strong sales leader who, by the way, can manage those two. Sometimes we're seeing account management peeled out under operations, particularly if it's heavy delivery, sort of hands-on consultative delivery organization, because that's very operational. But where I'm seeing that the most is in marketing roles. Companies increasingly want their marketing leader to be sales enablers who understand positioning, demand gen, top of funnel creation, sales enablement, pipeline, and also the revenue impact. Mid-sized companies are looking for what I call sort of full stack marketers, not just a brand content leader who makes pretty decks, right? Marketing attribution is never going to be a perfect science, particularly with our long sales cycle in healthcare. But they really want that strategic analytical marketing leader who can, to the best of their ability, measure their commercial impact. So I definitely see with marketing a big focus on sales enablement and support.
100%. I
Yeah.
live and breathe that every single day. I actually was earlier on a, 6 month sort of strategy call with one of our clients. And I mean, I think every single question I asked was specific around to their sales motion, the pipeline, because anything that we do on our side should be directly impacting that. If we're just posting on LinkedIn or we're just doing these
Yeah.
things off to the side, that's not going to be that's super valuable. But it's a catch 22 because I'll say being in marketing, all those things you listed, they're all very different functions. It could be a very different person who's incredibly talented at brand
Yes.
positioning and messaging versus getting into the analytical side of all of this. And I think we talked about this before. There's very few, it's kind of a unicorn personality that, they probably were a builder in an organization at one point where they had to own all of those functions. But
Yes.
then they were working really, really closely with leadership to really understand just the
Yeah.
business and the commercial motion within that. And they've risen up to the top. And so I'm curious in marketing specifically, is that something you've been seeing on your side as well? Because I recruit for this too and have lived it. You may not get the worst hires I've seen are actually those that have come from really large logos where they own a specific function and haven't
I have a
touched.
team of 50. Yeah, exactly. So I think, and I just worked on a situation similar to this where we wanted someone who it was an established company. It's been around a long time. It's profitable, but they've never invested in marketing in a big way. And they sort of were like, we're at an inflection point and we need to bring in a true professional marketing leader. But this was not going to be a team of 100 people. So we had to really focus in on what's most important. Usually it is that demand generation, sales enablement, pipeline. Oh, but also we're going to need a brand refresh. Oh, and our website needs this. And we need to figure out digital. So usually the right marketer is going to say, and I'll ask them this. I say, when you think about the full stack of marketing, what do you do best? And where are you going to, like, if you can hire 2 or 3 people, where are you going to hire them? And then where are you going to use I assume you have a network of 1099 contractors. And so normally they might say, I need a digital marketer. I need this person doing the socials, and I've got a great 1099 graphics person. You don't want me doing like touching anything graphically. So it's really asking them like, where are you going to shine and where do you need support? Like you want your marketing leader working at the top of their license. You don't necessarily want them figuring out how to create a beautiful deck. You want them to envision it and have their 1099 graphics person create that, right?
100%. And half the battle is, to your point of it, people are wanting more and more so strategic marketers and strategy strategic. That's such a
Yes.
term that we all throw around, but it falls into, can you have these higher level discussions with CEOs, other executives where you're not even talking about marketing at all and
Yeah.
really understanding the commercial growth function and, how
Yes.
marketing then fits into that. And then you
Yeah.
translate down to your team to
Right.
be able to then determine what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
My COO, Hope, and I, we talk about this all the time. It's kind of brand, demand, expand, and kind of working within there and kind of what those pillars are. And we've thought ruthlessly over like, what's the ideal market? If you had to be so lean and you could
Yeah.
only choose, a handful of people that are in there, it's that super strategic thinker at the top who's incredibly flexible and can just glean insights from a random offhand comment and can ask
Absolutely.
those right questions to dig in there. But then you've got to have the demand. We have to have
Yeah,
revenue. We have to have sales. And then, then you have to figure out how are we scaling this from
for
there.
sure.
So
Yeah.
really interesting. I'm curious on the flipping back to the chief commercial officer profile. I've
Mhm.
worked with obviously a handful of those. I'm curious from your perspective at various stages, because like you said, you're going to have the builder at a certain point, and you're going to have the person who's done this 100 times who could come in here. I have my own thesis of what makes an incredible chief commercial officer, but I'm curious from your perspective, maybe kind of give us 2 examples of different types of companies that you've
Mhm.
seen different types of profiles of chief commercial officers being successful in.
Sometimes when we come into the picture, we're coming in the heels of 1 or 2 failed commercial leaders. So maybe it was they overhired someone from a big company, or they brought in a big name person who knew how to run a playbook but didn't know how to build one. And then sometimes they underhired, like maybe it was, a family friend or a former colleague or, somebody, the brother-in-law who didn't really have sort of that rigorous process. So I think there's a couple different profiles. There is the company that is established, been founder led, but never really had a true sales motion or outbound sales motion. And then you're bringing in that builder, and that is your player coach, as we say. They are going to come in, maybe inherit 2 sales reps and might have to then hire additional ones or transition. And they're going to have to put in place that, repeatable, scalable, predictable sales engine. They might have to actually take a CRM that's been sitting there and use and optimize it. And you don't want that person creating your reports. They're going to probably want a sales enablement person as their one hire, but they're the ones who are going to stand up your process, get the engine running smoothly, and along the way, hire the right people while also, by the way, being out there selling on their own. And that profile could be someone who's done that before, or it could be someone who maybe was an individual seller, maybe had one report, but is hungry to get into leadership. And again, that scrappy, hungry Hamilton has something to prove to themselves and the company, and they're going to come in and sort of crush that, right? So that's more in a company where it's been founder led, didn't have a true sales function, or it is an earlier stage company where they're hiring the first leader. Where you sometimes want a more established person is, okay, we're a $150 million company. We're sort of stagnated. We need to maybe revamp a bit of our go-to-market motion, and we want to get from, 150 to 250. Then you're bringing in someone who's a little bigger, who's maybe a leader of leaders, because at that stage, you might have a VP of sales with 4 reps, and maybe you've got a VP of marketing, a VP of account management. So there you're looking for someone who probably touched on, all those functions to some degree, maybe managed marketing a little bit, but probably not a marketer, but someone who is more of that leader of leader. But when you're looking at your leader of leaders, again, you don't want someone who is sitting in their office staring at Salesforce.com all day and pinging people. You still want them leading from the front. You still want them to drive along with reps out in the field, but also knowing when they need to get in and when they don't. So I think there's a balance of wanting to have your hands in everything, but getting to a maturity in a sales leadership role where I know when I got to jump in and be boots on the ground, and I know when my team has it. Does that answer the question,
No,
Ashley?
that
I
was
want to make sure.
awesome because I
Okay.
actually just
Yeah.
lived through this
Yeah.
with one of our clients, and I think we thought we were more on that later stage, and then once we got under the hood, back to our
Yeah.
previous conversation, the infrastructure just didn't exist, and so we had to do the non-sexy part of actually
Yeah.
building up all of the process, actually adding in a pipeline call and having standards and structure around that, and really starting to build up the team. And like you said, you're that builder
Yeah.
plus the player coach
Hmm.
who's getting in there with them. And so definitely
Yeah.
something that I see a lot. And it's finding that interesting balance too, especially if you're an earlier stage company. If you're bringing in a chief commercial officer, you probably are hoping that they're going to come with some level of contact, some way, to be able to make
Yeah.
some introductions. So they have to have enough tenure, in the space to have built those. But to your point,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, yeah, if you can have someone that has had to build this on their own elsewhere and they
Yeah.
know best practices, I think that's the biggest disconnect I've seen. If they don't know those best practices, but they have, because they've had the teams under them building prior, but they have the contacts, it's still, there's that
Right.
disconnect. So if you can find that
Yeah.
next.
But I also do caution a little bit about indexing too heavily on a network. A network gets you a call, but if the person on the other end of the call doesn't have a need for what you're selling, or it's not solving a burning problem, you're not going to get past that first call. One thing we didn't really talk about is, whether people will sort of hire slightly left of center of their spec. And so, if I'm doing a search where the end buyer of the product or technology is a hospital, and let's just say it's a clinical technology, 9 times out of 10, we want someone who sold a clinical technology. I'm like, but someone who has sold revenue cycle, they know the long-winded process. And of course, rev cycle can get into clinical, I know. But, if you have somebody who's been selling RCM, they have been in and around hospitals long enough. They know the 18-month sales cycle. They know it takes a village with new stakeholders popping up like whack-a-mole all day long. They can network their way around, even if chief medical officers aren't their primary network, right? So, and same goes for payer. If somebody has sold payment integrity, but they've not sold into, the chief medical officer type, they'll network their way in. There are not that many payers out there. They've got the network of people within payers who can make introductions. So you know.
No, it's so true. I mean, it's kind of the same on the marketing side. Don't hire
Hmm.
just for the logo. Same thing with
Yeah.
this. Don't hire just for the Rolodex. It's looking into the personality of, are they
Right.
scrappy and hungry and willing to be
Yeah.
incredibly nimble and creative to navigate? Because none of these sales cycles will ever look the same from one payer to another payer to whatever it is. And so understanding the nuances of that and willing to get into it, it's
Yeah.
incredibly important because they navigate
Yeah.
incredibly long sales cycles.
Hmm.
Well, I'm curious if you're sitting with a healthcare founder or board getting ready to hire one of the most important executives in the organization, what do you wish they would figure out before they start the search that would make your life easier and then also your candidates' lives easier?
Hmm. I think one of the important things is ensuring that the board and the executive team are aligned on what they're looking for in this executive and what they want this person to accomplish. On the venture side, you might have 3 different VC firms on your board. PE, usually it's a little more uniform, but sometimes there's 2 PE firms. I've had a few searches where I've had 2 PE firms and each had 2 board members interviewing and they weren't aligned. Or the CEO was like, I just need someone to come in and can do this. And the board's like, well, we need someone who can do this and then in 5 years do that. So being aligned and understanding the trade-offs. I always say, not that people are homes, but it is like buying a house. You are not going to get the corner lot, the great school district, the walkout basement, the mother-in-law suite, the gym over the garage, the updated kitchen, and the main floor primary bedroom. Pick the 5 and
Hmm.
then figure out what's nice to have. And so I think that's part of your search consultant's role is, okay, guys, bring it down. Like, what are the 5 things that we're all going to mutually vet? And wouldn't it be great if we got this on the side? So I do think that's really important. I also think just making sure that you're ready for the hire. Sometimes I think they need to hire someone and we get into a search and they're like, we thought we needed this, but we actually need that. Like trying to get your ducks in a row and really hone in on what is the role and what do you want them to accomplish.
I think a good way for us to wrap this up with every conversation I've been wanting to ask a broader question and that I'm calling the one fix within here. And so, I'm curious if you were to get a magic wand and you can
Hmm.
fix one thing in healthcare tomorrow, no budget constraints, no regulatory constraints, no politics, what are you fixing?
I think this is probably a universal answer to some degree, but improving access to high quality, affordable healthcare for everyone, not just those who can afford it. So you think about everything going on in Medicaid, but children with special healthcare needs, homebound seniors, rural patients, low income families shouldn't have dramatically different care because of income or zip code, but they do, and we all know that. So, I would love for the reasons that most of us went into healthcare to actually come true, like helping people live healthier, better, longer lives by improving access and reducing cost of quality care. So I think that if I had a magic wand, healthcare talent, technology, and capital would flow towards the people with the greatest healthcare needs, not simply towards populations with the most attractive economics. But, that's a problem for someone much smarter than me to try to figure out.
You can start strategically placing people in the
I
right areas
know.
to start
I
to
know.
drive
And I love
that.
I think when you think about access, part of that has to do with like healthcare staffing. And so like when I think about companies that look interesting to me, in addition to those that are finding ways to preserve or expand access for vulnerable populations, I think about companies that are innovating in healthcare staffing and making healthcare education certifications more affordable so we can get more technicians, mid-level clinicians, and other qualified talent that then, for example, is able to open up more access to quality care for people who don't have that now. So those 2 sides of the equation there. And there's some interesting companies doing that on the staffing side that I think are really interesting as well.
Actually just met one today, interestingly enough. So I'll
Interesting.
send you his name.
Yeah, I
And built
wonder if
a
it's one
really
of the
cool
ones that I've
platform.
been kind of following a bit too. There's some really interesting ones. I love the companies that are empowering nurse practitioners and other clinicians to practice at the top of their license because I do believe that most of
What
us,
is the one? Corner Health? Is that the one that just
Corner Health and
Corner
Greater Good
Duet?
Health, yeah, both of them. And I'm like, half the time when I go to the doctor, I see an NP. They have more time for me. I am not one of the 20% responsible for 80% of the cost, not the one as of today. So I can see them. So why not have, pods of NPs under the, guidance of a PCP who focuses on the chronic, and then the healthy see the NP. It's brilliant. So
It's brilliant. I mean, it's one of
yeah.
those where I think you, just like me, we see so many innovations in healthcare. And,
Yeah.
it's at the point where it's like, if we can just bring it all together
Mhm.
at some point, maybe in
Yeah.
like 100 years, it'll happen with the pace
Yeah.
that they like to move. But like, it's all there and the pieces are all there. It's just then how do they start to work together
Yeah.
so that the outcomes can be what we're wanting?
I'll leave you, Ashley, with something I never forget. I was at the health conference in Boston the first year after COVID. So I guess it was 2021. I was meeting with a former advisory board colleague, Katie Higgins, who's had a great career and is now the chief commercial officer of Progeny, the one with a Y. And I remember we were meeting and we were looking around health, and it was smaller then. This is 2021. And she's like, all this money, all this innovation. I'm butchering the quote right now. Like all these companies trying to just chip away at a problem in healthcare. But at the end of the day, they're going to be sold for parts to Optum to get their exit. And
Yep.
I always like butcher her quote, but I always think about that when I'm covers. Like there's so much innovation going on, but then you've got to get that exit. And again, it might be, and Optum not so much now, but 4 years ago, like Optum, Change Healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
they were buying everybody up,
Yep.
And then the company, my old company, advisory board company, bought by Optum, and there's still parts of it left, but a lot of the tech we had got dismantled or integrated into Optum. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah,
No, I think it's such a good quote. And yeah, now health is completely, I mean, taking a whole life of its own.
I know. Well, if you're
And
going to be there, we should get together.
I'll be there.
All
So,
right.
for better or worse,
Okay.
every year I'm there.
I
So,
know.
well, I so appreciate you making the time to join me today. It was wonderful. I feel like we could even have a part two. I didn't even get to like dig into
I
your brain on the healthcare side of things, of just, where are you finding things that are interesting, but there's just so much to dig
Yeah,
into. I love the talent side of this because I live and breathe it every
it's
day as
neat.
well. So it's so
Yeah. Yeah, for
thank
sure.
you so
Good.
much
Well,
for
I
joining us.
appreciate you asking me to participate. This was so fun. And it also forced me to think about, a lot of things that are swirling around and that I hear all the time and try to sort of pin some themes down.